The most common question on the stream recently has been about legendaries, so it's time to make an updated video talking about the 3 legendaries I've been testing the most recently. And I want this to be very clear before we start. These are all just my opinions. It's based on the testing I've done, the flawed gameplay that I play every day, and how it helps me and doesn't help me. And it's also been based on seeing other people do things, the 10 plus years of me playing competitive PvE and also dungeons as well, knowing what's important for my playstyle and what might not be as important from other people's playstyle towards me as well. So let's get right into it. You see a lot of people talking about Super Strain. Okay, this is the legendary here on the chest. And it's kind of like the mainstream pick right now, where everybody is suggesting it's the only real option. And this is kind of a holdover from, you saw a lot of this in BFA and probably even in Legion too. I don't remember, but, and the reason that you're seeing that is because there's this prevailing notion that Blood DK is like able to stand firm in its tanking well enough that it doesn't actually need any defense, it just needs more offense. And that effective offense a lot of the time is effective defense. And that even though, less defense might make your job harder as a tank, killing mobs faster makes everything go better. And so this is a mentality that's really been bred over many, many years in a raid environment. It's something I completely agree with in a raid environment, of course, because you're not always tanking. You know what I mean? If you have your CDs up for the minute that you're tanking out of a 3-minute encounter, something like that, then that's all you need. You don't need any extra defense. You're not wearing defensive trinkets and legendaries to try to min-max your health in raid. You're trying to get as much damage as possible, to skip phases, to push mechanics, to make sure the fight is as easy as possible. But then it kind of spills over into Mythic Plus, and a lot of people are also taking this to be very valuable in Mythic Plus as well. So let's talk about why that might be. So the first thing that I've seen is that the Frost Fever situation there is actually going to refund runic power, or it's going to generate runic power more so. It doesn't refund anything. But so when you have this dot, Frost Fever, the 3 diseases on multiple targets, you're going to get a fair amount of runic power income. Now, I didn't realize it would work the way it does. It's like in chunks. It doesn't happen every second. I think it happens like every 5 seconds. And then there's only a chance. So it's not even like 100% chance. So, and this is based on somebody else's opinion. I have not actually tested this. But from what I saw on a post on the competitive WoW Reddit, a guy said that based on, the average of how often you would get runic power per 5 seconds per target, you'd have to be fighting, I think he either said 5 or over 5. I remember the word 5, but basically at least 5 targets to be getting more runic power per second than if you just used Bryndor's Might and the way that works. Okay. So whether or not that's true, I don't know, but that's kind of in my head a lot. I presume the guy's right. I don't know anything about how I would calculate the Frost Fever situation. There's smarter people out there who have done this already, okay? But I think what those people are missing a lot of the times is that whether or not you get a lot of runic power at in 5 seconds interval, that doesn't naturally mean that the spec can use that much runic power in those intervals. So what I'm going to say here is maybe a little controversial, but there's times when you don't want to use runic power 100% of the time it's available. And in keys especially, I feel like that's the case. And obviously in raids, it's a lot less important, but a lot of this discussion is coming from this theoretical almost like pillar where it's like you get runic power and you spend runic power. Don't ever overcap runic power. And it's like, okay, so first of all, that's assuming perfect play, which I am certainly not perfect. So I hope you are aware of that. I am not perfect. And frankly, I doubt you're watching a video on this topic if you are either. Second of all, it's also presuming that you can always make the best use of Death Strike every time you use it. Now, there's a couple components to consider. Of course, we're talking about not only defense, but also offense as well. Death Strike's one of the best hard-hitting spells you have, single target especially. And as we've said, a lot of people are very focused on dealing damage as a tank in a lot of these scenarios. So that could be another reason why these models might be looking at this as very good. And the third thing is, you're in a position where you need even amounts of death strikes frequently, right? So it's not only just about saving death strikes or pooling runic power, but it's also about making sure that you need them every time you use them. So sometimes you make a mistake is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes you use a death strike when you shouldn't have, and then you didn't realize you needed it until you don't have it. And that's the big issue I've been battling over the years. I feel like for Blood DK, it's a spec that you can make a lot of mistakes on really easily. And I would say that's why it's the hardest tank to play too, because if you do not manage your resources well, you will just get slaughtered. You get destroyed so severely, you'll never survive. And you know, for me, a lot of that is because I'm constantly not looking at the screen. A lot of times I end up using 2 or 3 hard strikes and I don't actually know how many targets I hit. So when I turn back, I have to quickly assess how much runic power I have and figure that out on the fly. And I've gotten better at it. It's not an ideal way to play, but it's part of the stream and part of how things work. So for me, this legendary is like this. I'm going to grade them based on this system from now on. Okay. All 3 of these help you offensively and defensively. It's just about which benefit you get more of. Okay. So for this legendary, it's 70% offense and 30% defense. That's the number I'm going to use. The offense part is quite good. It's very good in spread AoE. Like on a fight like Kael'thas, it's going to be exceptional. But in 5-mans, it's not as great as people are making it sound. You're not going to suddenly top the DPS charts. And frankly, it does a lot less damage than I expected it to per second. Like it adds up over the course of a dungeon, but it's not burst at all. It doesn't do any burst damage whatsoever. And a lot of times I would much prefer burst damage. So if there was a way that I could increase my burst damage, I would rather that. Like if we were talking about a legendary that did 70+% effectiveness for offense, I would be looking at one that helped me do good burst damage, because typically in 5-mans, that's what you want. But still, it's a very good option. And then there's another thing to consider about its offense is kiting. Okay, so right now there's kind of this, it's almost like a little seesaw going on here with tanking. A lot of people are still in this mindset that you cannot complete difficult keys without kiting. And I'm not the one to say yes or no on that, because I have not done, my highest key so far has been a 15. But yeah, like if you're looking to get into the 20s as a blood DK, maybe that's just fact. You know, maybe you can't actually survive these pulls on fortified without kiting. And then at that point, you have a big problem here, because you can't actually do anything with the Death Strike legendary or, you know, some of the other options. You need as much passive damage as possible staying on these mobs. So then that becomes very good. So that's another reason to consider this legendary, but not one that I'm participating in, so I don't feel like I need it. But all of that being said, it's very important to recognize the facts here that it does still increase your damage, okay? And even though I'm trying to say it's not as good as some other options and it's only, 30% of the value of the legendary, it does still help you. So if you're finding yourself being, especially in big AoE, if you're runic power starved, then this is a great legendary, because it's also going to increase your offense and it will help you with that problem, okay? But there's something else to consider about it before we move on, is that it synergizes very well with the Rune of Hysteria enchant. And if you don't know what that is, let's take a look real quick at it, just to be very thorough on this topic. So Hysteria engraves your rune weapon with extra 20 runic power, and you have a chance to increase runic power regeneration by 20% for 8 seconds. Now this is up all the time, like a lot, okay? And then the extra 20 runic power makes this a lot better, because one of the big issues I have with this legendary is that I'm constantly getting like too much runic power. I can't use it as fast as it's coming in at times on these big pulls, and it's just being wasted. But with Hysteria, it makes that a lot less likely to happen, and it gives me a bit more benefit when I need it. You know what I mean? But still, I think it's an inferior like runic power generator compared to the next option, and that is Bryndor's Might. Okay, this is the one I started with. This was the first legendary I made, and a lot of it was based on a guy named Kyrasis. If you don't know who this guy is, he's frankly an absolute technical wizard when it comes to the spec. I don't know exactly how long he's played Blood DK, but he seems to have an absolute mastery over like the mathematical fundamentals of what's important. And him and I have conversed on a few topics over the years, but the one thing that I admire the most about him is that he recognizes that there's also defense to consider, whereas some of the other people talking about Blood DK, they seem to be almost purely assuming that you're going to be able to survive no matter what. And unfortunately, a lot of them say, like, if you can't survive, that's your fault, not the gear's fault, so just get better. But again, we're living in an imperfect world. We cannot control all the variables as a tank, especially when we're pugging. So for me, pugging as a Blood DK who's often not even looking at the screen, these things have changed. The opinions might be altered, right? So what he said was that this legendary is by and large the best defensive legendary in the game. So I was like, okay, well, I suck, so I need to be as good defensively as possible early on so I could not suck as bad and we could complete keys. Because for me, I feel like if I just don't die, if I do a whole key where I don't die, we're going to upgrade it, right? You got to look at that way as a tank. Whether or not you're great at offense too, it's like, well, whatever. And we had this conversation on the stream. Like, would you rather top the DPS chart or would you rather never die in a key? And for me, I would rather never die in a key, even if it meant that, we were struggling with threat and all these other things. As long as I'm alive and me being alive can facilitate the pace of the group, like, it's not like I'm alive and everybody else is dead because I literally don't have threat and everything. It's a different situation. But anyway, so this legendary is going to refund 15% of the runic power spent if your Death Strike heals you for more than 10% of your maximum health. Now, really quick, you should realize that with Voracious, the talent, that will always happen. So if you're not using Voracious, then there will be times when that doesn't happen, and that will change things. I know a lot of people like Bloodworms. It's still a very good heal. I'm actually really disappointed with how much damage it does compared to BFA. Maybe it's just because we're doing more damage, but I tried Bloodworms plus Super Strain, and Bloodworms was quite bad compared to even Super Strain. So I'm not really sure how to feel about the offensive part, but just realize Voracious does not increase your actual damage in any way. This one does. So again, if you're subscribing to the damage first mindset, then you're going to have a different opinion on this legendary. Another reason that a lot of these people might not be considering this legendary. But either way, with the same situation in place, Voracious, this Death Strike legendary, and the Rune of Hysteria, I'm finding this to be an immense amount of runic power. Almost too much. And I think that that's a big problem here, because even though, again, I trust the resource that I've been reading about from this guy who knows a lot about the technical side of Blood DK, the way I've played, which is obviously flawed in many ways, I just don't find them all to be that useful. Like, there's times when it's like, I just don't need 4 Death Strikes, you know what I mean? So, right, obviously you just use them more offensively, right? But now we're back to the same situation I just described. Now we're in a scenario where I'm using them too liberally because I know I'm wasting a ton of runic power by not doing that, and then I'm wasting too much. And so it's like, this back and forth that I'm having mentally, and I've been struggling a lot with it. But so the thing about the legendary, though, is that I think it's just objectively better than Super Strain, is that it's going to give you runic power when you want it, not whenever the game wants you to get it. So Super Strain is going to give you runic power every 5 seconds or whatever, and you can't really control it. Apparently it's random, whatever. You're going to get it regardless. So if there's a time when you're sitting on Death Strike, you know what I mean? Like, if you have, if in a 4-second window, you're going to get hit really hard and you're pooling runic power, but then you get that tick at the 5th second, right when you're about to Death Strike, that gave you nothing. Okay? So I think a lot of the topic that's developing around these two legendaries is assuming almost like a theoretical perfection, like that you're never going to waste runic power from this legendary and that you're never going to waste runic power from this legendary. Truth be told, this legendary, it's a lot harder to waste runic power. But what it does is you end up with this almost like, it's like a water basin. You ever see like when a pool won't empty all the way because there's just this water basin in it? You almost can't get rid of all your runic power. If you have this plus Hysteria, you're almost just kind of always sitting at like 20 some runic power. And it's just like, well, why am I using these things? I don't need this much. This legendary almost opened my eyes to being like, wow, I just suck. I'm playing poorly, so poorly that it's devaluing this legendary. So I still think this is an amazing legendary because especially, like I said, when you get the runic power back, that's because you just Death Strike. That's the most important time to get it back. And with the Voracious talent plus the Rune of Hysteria, this is a really good option. But there's a third option, and I don't think a lot of people are considering it right now, but I'm very satisfied with what I've seen recently, okay? And that is Crimson Rune. When a charge of Bone Shield is consumed, the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon is reduced by 3 seconds. Additionally, when Dancing Rune Weapon fades, your rune regeneration rate is increased by 40%. Now, this is a bigger deal than you might think. This last part, your rune regeneration rate is increased by 40%. If you're a Night Fae, that is something to really look at because it's like, oh my God, you know what I mean? When you put Dancing Rune Weapon up and then you get 40% extra runes for 10 seconds right after your biggest CD went down, that's the time when you build those stacks of Death's Due on the target, not on yourself, but on the target. So you're stacking a 1% damage increase with every hard strike in your D&D on the target. And that is just I think it's an undersold thing. I know a lot of people like Venthyr and other people are playing Necrolord and Kyrian for different reasons. But I'm telling you, I think Knife A is a sleeper pick this expansion for DK, and I'm very happy to choose it. I did not choose it for any reason other than I love this zone and I love being in Ardent Wield and being a Knife A. But I'm actually really falling in love with Deaths 2. And this legendary is really making me think that it's going to work very well for what I'm doing. Because first of all, like I said, I don't play perfectly, okay? But having more dancing rune weapon is huge for me. We did it this week with Necrotic and it was unbelievable. And I know other people are going to have different opinions about this, but having dancing rune weapon for basically every pack is pretty nuts, okay? Now, I don't have any actual hard evidence of this, but if you want to prove me wrong, you could go in my spreadsheet and look at every key I've done with this legendary on, which would basically be like the last 15 or something like that, and you could count it out yourself. I've looked at it 4 different times in 3 different dungeons, and each time it took at least 40 some seconds off dancing rune weapon, okay? Now, I don't know like what the variable is there, but there was times when it actually took more than that off. And all I could think of is like, you know, this time in between combat when you're not losing bone shield, that's obviously adding up. Maybe there's something wrong with the weak ore too. Like it's not calculating it properly because we had this problem with Ineffable Truth and in BFA, the weak ore wasn't calculated. I don't know for sure, but what I'm seeing on the screen is at least 40 seconds off dancing rune weapon. So that's turning a 2-minute CD into a 1 and point something CD. Now, people on the stream were telling me that they counted as well and that it was closer to an actual 1-minute CD. Regardless, if it's anything under a minute and a half, this is huge because as you know, most trash packs last about a minute and a half. So that means that you are going to have a big CD, not just, you know, not Vamp Blood, a big CD that's going to help you survive every single pack, okay? With this legendary on. Is that good enough? I don't know if it is yet, but I will tell you it's not just that. I think everybody's sleeping on this part here on the, I can't actually highlight over it because I'm hovering over it. They're sleeping on the rune regeneration part. And for me, that is an even bigger defensive. This whole legendary together is very, very, very strong. But there's a couple other things to consider besides just what we've talked about, okay? So first things first is playing around each of these legendaries, okay? So the thing about Super Strain is it's set it and forget it kind of thing. You don't have to do any thought. You literally just press Blood Boil, which is something you're going to press all the time, and you just get a passive income of both damage and runic power, of course. So we've talked about why that's a variety of good, but there's nothing that you could really do that helps with that. We had thought that there was going to be, like with rapid decomposition, I was thinking maybe, you know, if you buff Blood Plague 15% more often, it will also buff these things. From what I tested, at least in the beta, I haven't looked at it since, that doesn't happen. It doesn't make any difference. And even if it did, Hemostasis is just so good in 5-mans, I don't think you would ever use anything but that at this point. So I don't see there being any type of synergy here. There's no relics, there's no, you know, or conduits, there's nothing that I could see synergizes. Another thing, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that haste does not seem to impact the actual disease ticks on this. And I don't know that for fact, but I've seen people that I believe to know what they're talking about say that. So maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But either way, this is only going to be as strong as it is right now for the rest of the expansion. Because you're never going to get more runic power from it. And even though your damage is going to go up with it, I guess, you know, your strength scaling on these dots are going to go up. It's just going to be proportional to the damage you're already doing. Like, you know, it's always going to be like 10% of your overall damage, regardless of how much damage you're doing with it. The only thing that matters is count, the amount of targets it's on, okay? Now, there's another situation that's developing here, right? Regardless of what we said about the 5 target thing or whatever that is, even if it was literally only 2 targets, okay? How often are you in a scenario where 2 targets, you know, where more than 1 target is extremely dangerous to you? You have to consider this. I'm not being facetious. I'm asking you. Think about this. Are you struggling more with trash or with bosses? Are you struggling more with really big pulls or really, you know, small dangerous pulls? Okay. So for me, some of the hardest pulls in the game are not 10 pulls, because the only time I ever pull more than like 3 or 4 mobs is when it's like complete fodder, like shit that just literally doesn't matter. Is never going to kill me. Even if I don't press abilities, it will not kill me. So that's when that legendary really gets good. But on those packs like you know, we've had those packs kind of like in Necrotic Wake and in Theater of Pain and in some of these other dungeons that are like, oh my god, this is the hardest part of the dungeon and it's trash. Will I be able to survive? That's the make or break moment. Live or die on this trash pack. We upgrade the key. A lot of that in Necrotic Wake, a lot of that in some of these dungeons, and it's never because there's a lot of targets. It's because there's one extremely dangerous mob, right? So at that point, then you find yourself thinking like, well, maybe this legendary isn't as good. And then it's the same thing for Bryndor's Might. This is obviously just going to be better on single target, right? Like you're going to actually increase your offense and defense on a single target a lot. Whereas this is only going to, this is going to increase your offense a lot on all targets, but the more targets you have, potentially the better it gets. But then the defense is terrible on a single target, right? So like the 70-30 thing we said about that, this is more like probably like 60 defense, 40 offense on a single target, but only then it's like 80 defense versus 20 offense on multiple targets. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to consider that. And I think that this legendary has a lot more things you can do to play around it, because you have Voracious, like I said, you have the situation with Rune of Hysteria, but most importantly, the more Death Strikes you get, the more Red Thirst you get. And I could easily see this being something that gets really crazy in the future, because first of all, the more versatility and mastery we get, the better each of these Death Strikes get. And then of course, the more haste we get, the more Death Strikes we can get off, so the more runic power we refund. Like imagine if at some point you had an infinite amount of haste and you were literally just Death Striking so frequently that it would basically be one generation, Death Strike, one generation, Death Strike, like every other global, right? That's like the dream with the Blood Decay. Just generate, Death Strike, and then you're set for like an infinite loop of things, right? And that's never going to happen, of course, theoretically, but it's something that, this legendary will never happen. That will never happen with that case, because you'd have to be fighting like 50 mobs for that to matter. You know what I mean? But it's still two things to consider for this legendary. And then finally, you have this legendary, which I think actually has the most things that you can do to maximize it. So let's talk about that really quick. When I tested this week, it was on the advice of somebody who had seen a guy named Fizzy Bubble or something like that, playing Blood Decay at a very high level. Now, I've tried to look this guy up. He doesn't seem to have any VODs or streams or anything that you can look at. I couldn't find it myself. But he is apparently using this as his main legendary and is committed to it. And he's doing quite high keys, like above like 17 and stuff. So that's pretty impressive. But what I've seen from him is he's not just using the legendary. It's not just put these legendaries on and don't do anything about it. It's also changed some other stuff. So we're going to show you why some other things should change too, okay? So what he is using is the Meat Shield conduit, okay? This is something that on its own looks to be solid. It makes Rune Weapon 3 seconds longer and extra maximum health. Is very nice. Something to consider is this maximum health is going to last much longer than the Rune Weapon. So you're going to have this for an extended period of time. So up to over 5% right now at 200. And that goes really well with the fact that you're going to get basically, I'd say like at least 50% more dancing Rune Weapons. Let's just be very conservative and say 50%, or I'm sorry, like 25% more dancing Rune Weapons. Not double. Well, you know what I mean. Yeah, 50, I don't know. Terrible math. You understand what I mean. You're not going to get double, but you're going to get under double. So let's say that. So that's going to make this conduit much better than it normally is, right? So if people think this is a fine conduit, then that's going to help a lot, okay? And then you start to think about this conduit, right? So this is another one of those scenarios where people are saying this is just an invaluable conduit because literally you don't even have to use a rune. It's off the GCD and you get 15 free runic power. Totally agree. That's amazing. But with some of these other situations, you're going to need runic power a lot less. Like the amount of times I've used this and not gotten 15 runic power is quite high because I'm already capped or something like that, And again, that's not perfect play. I understand that, but I'm not a perfect person. And I don't think many people are. So on top of that, you have an amazing conduit, which helps a lot. None of these have anything. These do not have any type of conduit. But there's one other thing, okay? And that is this talent, Tombstone. Now, this has long been the laughing stock of the Blood DK community because, frankly, it's pretty retarded. It's just a dumb idea, okay? Consuming up to 5 Bone Shield charges when you have something like Ossuary that's formerly a talent, but now a baseline spell, it's just not a really good idea because it's just going to make your overall kit a little bit worse. It's a 1 minute CD. It's going to consume 5 Bone Shield charges, and it's going to give you runic power based on how many. So the most you're going to get is 30, and it's also going to put a big absorb on you. Now, I tested this weekend, and I used it very improperly, I'm sure. I didn't maximize it at all, but it was my second on healing by a large margin. I do think it just took healing away from other things, though, of course. Even though it's giving runic power, it's not direct, like, you can't always use the 30 runic power that you're getting from it. You recognize this conversation, right? We were just talking about this with the legendaries. You can't always use that 30 runic power well. So I don't think that it should be considered for that. But instead what it could be considered for is almost like a second arm of Dancing Rune Weapon. Because you're going to get it's not a huge shield. It's a large shield, but it's not like full health shield, okay? But you're going to get a relatively large shield for a moderate downside. I mean, like, it's not the best thing. It's not just a flat shield, okay? But you're going to get Rune Weapon a lot faster, okay? And so basically every cooldown of Rune Weapon, you will be able to use this at least once, okay? When I tested this and it was done very improperly and very poorly, it definitely made Rune Weapon a 1 minute CD, 100%. And in fact, I'm not 100% sure I read this right, but there was a time when I used both of them at the same time, like back to back, and Rune Weapon was up before Tombstone. So that meant it under a minute CD, okay? So on top of that, you've effectively just added 2 major CDs because you've just gotten an extra Rune Weapon, which we, are not going to have without the legendary, and you've gotten a big shield now. So is it better than Heartbreaker? For me, I don't see how it could be. I just can't imagine using this well. But I think the difference is because I'm Kyrian, or I'm sorry, is because I'm Night Fae, okay? As a Night Fae, I can get way more defense out of just using Heartbreaker and using, the normal, Heartbreak or whatever, Heart Strike and Death Strike normally, okay? But I could see this being very good, especially if you're the Necrolord Covenant, because your 2 minute CD there is actually going to help you generate Bone Shield anyway. So it's a lot to consider, all right? And I think all of these topics are being considered in this theoretical vacuum where people never expected the conduits and the covenant systems to be as boisterous as they are. They think like, okay, well, there's probably some like top-down hierarchy. It's like, okay, everybody's Venthyr. So then what's the best thing for Venthyr? Well, at that point, you're like upfront down, all these things are contributing to this. So that makes this better, or maybe this better in defense. But then but nobody's Night Fae. Nobody's talking about it from a Night Fae perspective, where that 40% extra rune regeneration is like, I mean, that's a big deal, honestly. I feel like that is a really big deal. In fact, I'm taking Blood Tap for that same reason, so I can get more uptime on Death's Due. And, especially considering you're hitting multiple targets with a 1% damage reduction every time you use a spell that is already core to your rotation, I have a lot of trouble believing that this isn't a good legendary. So, TLDR, okay? And I forgot to mention it, but I wanted to say that this legendary's like offense to defensive split is not insignificant either. Even though Dancing Rune Weapon is one of the best defensive CDs in the game, it's certainly a good offensive CD too, okay? So I would say it's probably more like 70-30, but having more burst offense, like we talked about, instead of Super Strain, is actually very valuable. There's many times that, because I had Rune Weapon, I could burst for like 5k on Rune Weapon, even as Night Fae, you know what I mean? And it's like, wow, that's pretty damn good. With Rune Weapon up every pack, that increases our DPS. So it's not, it does increase your DPS. So if you're also worried about DPS, all 3 of these do increase your DPS. It's just to a variable amount, and it's not going to hang out with Super Strain in that level, but it will help you in both ways, 100%. So let's talk about when and where I'm going to use these, okay? I think I'm probably going to use this on Tyrannical Weeks. And that sounds a little weird because we were just talking about how on a single target, it's not as good and all that. But from what I've seen so far, Tyrannical Weeks are just easier than Fortified Weeks for me. Like, I literally don't, like, to die to a boss, it will happen, and I'm certain it will. But for the most part, it's like, I don't need a legendary for that. That's just like a raid boss then at that point. Just play well and pay attention and dodge mechanics and you're good. So to die to a boss, it would be, I feel like it'd be a lot less likely. So even though Tyrannical Week, on paper is going to be a harder week, it's not going to be because of me. Conversely, the trash is so easy on many Tyrannical Weeks that I could see myself pulling 2 or even 3 packs at a time. And then you really start to get a benefit from Super Strain. So right now, if we were doing like your standard that's not necrotic, your standard Tyrannical Week, I'd have that on. I'd have Super Strain on. And I would be testing that out and making sure that it's doing good damage. And then I'd be watching videos to making sure I'm getting good runic power income from it. But most importantly, I'd be making sure that I'm not suffering on bosses from it. And I think that I would not be. So I'd probably use that on most Tyrannical Weeks. And like I said, not for the reason you think. And then this, I think I would probably use this on most Fortified Weeks. Any week where you have to pull dangerous packs, pack after pack, because every time you Death Strike, it's going to make your life slightly easier. And more importantly, it's going to give you more access to Red Thirst. That is a really big deal. On Fortified Weeks, getting that extra healing from the healer on trash is sometimes the biggest deal that you could possibly get. Your healing goes up, and so does the healing on you. So Death Strike becoming more frequent and getting more Red Thirst is going to be really huge. And I could see myself, like I said, I could see myself using that on most Fortified Weeks. And then this legendary is kind of on the periphery right now. Even though I like it a lot, I could see myself using it on Fortified Weeks. In fact, I could see myself not even recommending Bryndors anymore for my playstyle. But right now, I'm still very comfortable with it. Slightly higher eye level too, so that helps a lot. But this legendary is just really good for any week where you absolutely either need to kite or absolutely need to dodge or, like not get hit, okay? So really the big one is necrotic, right? That's the big one. But it's not just necrotic, because there's other times when you have to kite some. Could be sanguine, could just be different dungeons, like, sanguine depths, ironically. There's a lot of kiting that you might need to do in there. And I think that is a really good time for a legendary like this, because you open with Rune Weapon, you get extra value from the whole legendary there, and then you could move on. You know what I mean? If you have to kite, you can. So I think both of these legendaries are very good for kiting. This one is definitely going to help you keep threat longer, and it's going to help you keep up with the DPS who are doing big threat over the course of a pull. But this one will give you more burst damage and more access to a good defense of every pack, and then it will allow you to build into your kite. And this legendary is just going to be good day to day. Every time you Death Strike, it's going to be better. So what do you want? Do you want more damage and slightly more runic power income, which does help with Red Thirst? Do you want legendary where you're going to significantly increase your Death Strike availability when you need it the most, right after you use a Death Strike? And will you get a lot more Red Thirst from it, especially something that's going to scale as we get more gear? This one's going to get really nice. And then this one, do you want to just be more physically defensive more frequently and potentially do more burst damage and have slightly more synergy with the dancing rune or with the Death's Due situation as Night Fae? These are all things to consider. So these are my thoughts. I hope that this has helped you as thorough as I can be. What would I recommend you craft? I'm not going to tell you that. Think about what I talked about. Make the decision that seems right for you and your playstyle, and stop worrying about what other people are doing. Frankly, I don't want to make this video because I don't want people to be thinking like, oh, I'm going to just listen to this guy and do whatever he says. Don't do that. That's really dumb. Think about who you are, what you do in this game, especially what covenants and your playstyle overall. Think about the problems you're having on your character and figure out which playstyle changes you could make to help you overcome these problems. So thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.